I want to start with a story that I found this week of a U.S. Marine sergeant whose name was Dakota Meyer. He was serving in Afghanistan in September of 2009 when he heard on his radio of a Taliban attack on a nearby village. Members of his unit and a number of Afghan allied fighters were being bombarded in the enemy fire. He repeatedly asked his superiors for approval to assist those under attack, but he was repeatedly denied the permission to do so. It was simply too dangerous, and they decided he was far too outnumbered. Defying the orders, he headed into the besieged village. And long story short, he ends up getting killed by enemy fire. All the members of his unit are later found dead, and all those Afghan fighters are also found dead. We also lost a lot of military equipment and Humvees and stuff in the fight. And so, military orders, they exist for a reason. This is not something that you just disobey because you think you know better. Except that's not even the true story. The true story is he actually did defy those orders. He did go in. Over the next several hours, he entered this kill zone 5 times and rescued 23 Allied Afghans and 13 Americans. He was under heavy enemy fire that entire time. Despite receiving shrapnel wounds to his arm, Meyer was able to kill at least 8 Taliban while evacuating his fellow Marines to safety. He ended up being given the Medal of Honor by President Obama, and during the ceremony, Obama said to him, "Dakota, I know that you've grappled with the grief of that day, that you've said your efforts were somehow a failure because your teammates didn't all come home. But as your commander-in-chief, and on behalf of everybody here today, and all Americans, I want you to know it's quite the opposite. You did your duty, far above and beyond, and kept the faith with the highest tradition of the Marine Corps that you love. Because of your honor, 36 men are alive today." So if we look at the fake version I just said of that story, everyone would say that was a really foolish thing to do. But if we take the awesome outcome, everyone would say that was wise. So does wisdom on a decision that we make depend solely on the outcome? Does that mean that a poor outcome means it was a foolish decision and a good outcome means it was a very wise decision? Or is it more than that? It's obviously more than that because we all know that wise decisions can have poor results and very foolish decisions can sometimes have incredible results. And so wisdom is our topic today as we're continuing on in Bible life with the book of Proverbs. We've got 3 more weeks in the Old Testament before we start heading into the New Testament. And I don't know why Andy decided that the week on wisdom was the week to go on vacation and throw it to the 27-year-old, but here we are, so let's get going with our text today. Proverbs 1:1-7 says, "The Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel, for learning wisdom and discipline, for understanding insightful sayings, for receiving prudent instruction, in righteousness, justice, and integrity, for teaching shrewdness to the inexperienced, knowledge and discretion to a young man. Let a wise person listen and increase learning, and let a discerning person obtain guidance. For understanding a proverb or a parable, the words of the wise and their riddles. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and discipline." So this is the purpose statement, essentially, for the book of Proverbs, and it really culminates there in verse 7a. But if we actually parse it apart, there's actually 12 different purposes that are listed there in those first 6 verses of Proverbs. So if this is the purpose statement for the book of Proverbs, here's just a few observations I had while studying the text this week. The book of Proverbs was written to teach wisdom through devotion to God. And if that's what the purpose is, then we have to ask the question, well, what is wisdom? If I ask you what wisdom is, I'm sure every one of us would say, yeah, I know exactly what wisdom is. And then when I ask you to put it into words, it might not be so clear. 2 different concordances I looked at. Strong's Concordance says that wisdom is the capacity to understand and so have skill in living. The Logos Fact Book says that it's the ability to apply knowledge or experience or understanding. So essentially, it's skill at life. As that first one says, skill in living, it's life skill. And thus, it's predicated on knowledge. We can't have skill in life unless we know what that skill is. You can't have skill as a piano player if you have never touched a piano and don't know what a piano is. There's 2 parts of wisdom, and I'm going to call them divine wisdom and human wisdom, for lack of better terms. See, divine wisdom is this more complete wisdom. It has that ultimate purpose. It's connected with all of our real life, while that human wisdom it lacks that ultimate purpose. It still teaches us a skill in life, but it lacks that overarching view. Something like being a carpenter or an electrician. Those are both skills at life, and those are good skills to learn. We don't need to have a Christian teach us how to be an electrician, because humans can teach us that, but it's going to lack that overarching, that ultimate purpose of glorifying God through it. John Goldengay, in his commentary on Proverbs, says that Proverbs assumes that you cannot make sense of our world or live a full and successful life unless you see God behind it and involved in it, and seek understanding of it from God with reverence and humility. So again, there's that divine wisdom, and there's also that human wisdom aspect, because humans can teach us skill at life, but they can't teach us the complete and full wisdom of God. Another commentary I read mentioned that there are 4 parts of complete wisdom: the practical, the intellectual, the moral, and they involve the mysteries of life. The mysteries of life being all those nuances that are part of our daily lives that we can't teach wisdom in a black and white, cut and dry, step 1, 2, 3, 4 kind of situation, because there's so many different nuances. It's more of an overarching idea. I think a good example of all these 4 different aspects is Rahab. When we dig into the story of Rahab, it gets really confusing, and there's a lot of questions we might ask, because she's commended for what she does, even though she commits the sin of lying. And lying is a sin, and when Rahab committed that act, she was sinning. But she's commended not for the act, but for the heart that's behind it, that righteousness in her heart. She has the practical of what is happening in the situation. She has the intellectual of the different options she has and the ways to make those options happen. She has the moral, obviously, because she picks the right moral decision. And this is obviously a mystery of life, because I don't think she woke up that morning thinking that that's how her day was going to end. We also can never reach the finish line of wisdom, and this is made obvious, this is just obvious in general, because we all know that we can't ever reach that finish line. But verse 4 notes that Proverbs was written for the young, and verse 5 says it's written for the already wise. So not only can we not ever complete our wisdom, just like we can't reach that completion of faith or our sanctification in that, it's also it's written for all of us. We can't ever graduate from the course of Proverbs even, or any of the other wisdom literature that the Bible holds. Verse 7b says that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. The beginning being that foremost, or that most essential element. It doesn't say that the fear of the Lord is the end of knowledge, just like the fear of the Lord is not the end of our salvation. It's the beginning. It's a lifelong process that we all must walk through. Philippians 1:6 says, "And I am sure of this, that he who began a good work in you will bring it to completion at the day of Jesus Christ." It's a lifelong thing we have to walk through and learn, and it will be completed only on the other side of this life. On the flip side, verse 7a makes it clear that fools are too prideful to receive wisdom. And this is not a punishment, it's an observation. Now it says, it doesn't say pride outright, but that's really what's behind it. Because it's not that they just lack wisdom or lack the ability to get wisdom. They actively despise instruction. And the best way I can think to picture this is going with a man to Home Depot where he doesn't know where something is, or maybe even what it's called. No man ever wants to talk to a worker at Home Depot and admit his failures. It's just something that it means to be man, is to not ask for help at a hardware store. Luke 5:31, Jesus answers them, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick." And he's talking here to the Pharisees, and the Pharisees are a very good picture of this passage, because he's not saying that the Pharisees don't actually need him. He's saying, you guys are so puffed up with pride that you don't think you need me, and so I have nothing to offer you, because you refuse to admit that you need that instruction. And I think we all have moments in our lives where we are too puffed up with pride to simply ask somebody else for help. Finally, to live wise is to live according to God's ways. That's what it means to live with true, complete wisdom, is to live in the ways that God has asked us, or told us there is the correct way to live. 1 Corinthians 10:31 says, "So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do all to the glory of God." And we can't do that if we don't know what the ways of God are. So if all of the book of Proverbs is predicated on wisdom and teaching wisdom, then we have to ask the obvious question of how do we get wisdom? And this is, again, a question that if I ask any of us, we probably all have an idea in our mind of how we get wisdom until we try to put it on paper, and then it might not be so clear. The first part, again, with reference to verse 7a, is to get rid of pride. And that's also referenced in verses 2 and 3. Because without that humility, we just won't ever ask for instruction. That's what pride is. It's saying that I know better. And so if we can't get rid of that pride, if we don't ask God to remove that pride from our hearts and act in humility, we're never going to actually gain wisdom because we won't want it. Secondly, we need to know God, hear him speak, and do what he says. I think a lot of times we try to in our lives, maybe we don't even try, but we end up kind of only doing two parts of those three. We know God and we do what he says, but we don't really hear him speak into our lives. Or we know God and we hear him speak and then we ignore him and don't do what he says. Or maybe we hear him speak and we're doing what he says, but we don't even really know who it is that's speaking. True and complete wisdom comes from God alone. Now, he does often work through other people. He works through his word, but it comes from God alone at its source. If we look at the book of Job, I don't know about you, but when I read through the book of Job, I get confused a lot as to what Job's friends are saying, if it's true or if it's foolishness. Because there are some very correct things that Job says, that his friends say, and it's really hard to see what's true, what's not, what's wise, what's foolish, until God appears on the scene at the end and puts color to this whole black and white picture that they've been drawing. And there's many other places in the Scripture where people know God and they hear him speak, and when they do what he says, they are living with wisdom. In James 1:5-7 says, "If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given him. But let him ask in faith with no doubting, for the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind. For that person must not suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord." When I've read that before, I really hone in on that to ask in faith with no doubting. Somebody pointed me to a commentary that pointed out that the better translation of doubt is something more like playing the middle, or in other words, only following what God says when it seems of benefit to you. And I know this might be a little bit of a flawed example because we're sinful and God is not, but if somebody comes to you for help and you give them the correct answer and then they go do the opposite and create calamity for themselves, do you really want to help them when they come back and ask you for help again? You don't. I mean, if we're going to go to God and ask him to give us wisdom and then do the opposite, why should we expect that he's going to give us wisdom again just for us to ignore him? I was reading Jeremiah this week, and in Jeremiah 42, the people who are going into exile, they ask Jeremiah to ask God what we should do, and God responds, "Don't go to Egypt." So naturally, Jeremiah 43 is about them going to Egypt. And then in Jeremiah 44, God says they're all going to be destroyed for going to Egypt. So our moral of the story, don't go to Egypt. But we have to know God and hear him speak and do what he says, and to hear him speak and to know who he is, we have to be in his word. Wisdom also has an active component and a passive component. We have to seek it out, but it also has to be given to us. There's plenty of scripture that's written for this reason. Obviously, Proverbs is Solomon and later scribes compiling this book of wisdom to teach others. But 1 and 2 Timothy, the second verse in both of those, Paul's writing to what he calls his child in the faith, that is Timothy. 2 Timothy, Paul is near the end of his life, and he's passing on that wisdom, his faith, and instruction to that next generation. And he's doing the same thing in the book of Titus as well. You see, our legacy is always determined by those who come after us. A lot of it is predicated on how much effort we put into making an impact on others, but really what creates our legacy is how those people are impacted. My grandpa died back in September, and we were cleaning out his house, and I got a couple family things that I took, and right here's a Bible. It's a fairly old Bible. There's actually a date in it, which I didn't notice until right this second, from 1967. And it's signed D. Wise Graber, Stryker, Ohio. And that would be my great-grandfather from about 60 years ago, which I just thought that's a pretty cool thing to hold. He was the one that planted the church that I went to growing up. It's since closed its doors, but it's pretty cool to know that my great grandfather who planted this church, I've got his Bible that he may or may not have preached out of at that pulpit. I've got a hymnal here too. This is the Mennonite hymnal. This is the red book. This was before we went to the blue book, which don't even get me started about that. But on the inside cover, it says Orlis, which was my great-grandmother. I don't know why Rachel is so against us naming our daughter Orlis, but, that's a side point. But this is my great-grandmother's hymnal that she, I assume, played and sang out of. And so, that was pretty cool. Two of my great-grandparents on that side of the family, I've got these articles of the faith from them. And I've got this Bible, too. This one's pretty beat up. This is the Living Bible. And on the cover of this one, it says David D. Graber. And Dave was my grandfather who died last September. And so, I've got his father's Bible, I've got his Bible, and on the inside cover, he has the wisdom written, 15th Street East, north across 63rd Street. So I take those words to heart every day. That was a joke for you people that weren't paying attention. And finally, here's another hymnal. This is the same one, but it's on the inside cover. It says Elaine Graber, and Elaine was my grandma who died back in 2020. And these are cool family relics. It's cool to be able to hold something in my hand that was signed by my great-grandfather 60 years ago, and to have stuff that my grandparents both held dear. But it made me think as I was, Grandpa had a number of Bibles. We had a few from my great-grandpa. We had all these, the old Bibles and hymnals and everything. And it made me think about the fact that right here, I'm holding two different books from 3 generations above me about what faith meant to them. I never met my great-grandpa. He was dead 15 years before I was born. My great-grandma died a little before I was 2, so I don't remember her either. But it's because of what they passed on that I'm here today. Who knows? Maybe God would have worked something else differently, but the people represented by this Bible and this hymnal, they passed on that wisdom down to their children, who passed it down onto their children, which would have been my dad, who passed it on to me. Their legacy, like I said, Grandpa's church closed its doors. If you go back to Stryker, Ohio, there's not a lot of people anymore that still remember the name Wise Graber. But what he did, his legacy is passed on to me. And I know his name not just because he was part of my family tree, but because that faith and that salvation that he had has been passed on through generations to me. My generation is crying out for help, and they're finding it in all the wrong people. I don't think it's hard to see that they're finding it in the wrong people when we turn on the news today and see what's going on. They're crying out for help, and we as the church are not giving them that help. I don't know how many people in the conservative realm that I've heard make statements like, well, drop your drawers and I'll tell you what gender you are. Now, I understand the logic there, but do you know who that's helping? Not a single person. If we've got somebody who is struggling with homosexual temptations, do you think noting that it was Adam and Eve and not Adam and Steve makes a difference? Who's going to want to come to that person who's spewing that out of their mouth instead of trying to just help these people? And if I sound like I'm a little frustrated about it, it's because I am, because I've been that person. The 2 people who I can know that have been the most discouraging to me in ministry have been 2 pastors. When I was looking at changing my college major from mechanical engineering to biblical studies, a pastor was the only one who told me it was the wrong thing to do. There was a pastor friend of ours, of me and my wife's, who, him and his wife, we just thought were a really good image of what pastors and what spouses should be. They interacted, with each other well, with their family well. We thought that, her role within the church, even though she wasn't, full-time ministry or anything, we just thought it was a really good picture of how we ought to live our lives as a ministry couple. And this was before we moved here. But knowing that was coming, I reached out to him at one point and said, hey, we would love to just meet with you guys, once a month, twice a month. We just basically explained to him what I just said and said, we just want to, receive your wisdom on this. And his answer was essentially that I could meet with you maybe once or twice, but I really can't commit to a monthly or every other month thing. And I don't know if maybe it was our incredibly busy season of life. Maybe he was going through some stuff. I don't know. But that's not what my ears heard. My ears didn't give him the benefit of the doubt. My ears heard, I don't care. So many people in my generation are just crying out for help, and they're hearing it from these people who are just telling them to follow your heart and do what makes you happy. And we're in this spiral that I don't even need to explain it to you because we all see it happening. And I say this all not to try to convict anybody, not because I'm yelling at anybody, but because I'm pleading with you that people like me need help. Look at what's happening on the news on these college campuses. I know that there's kids are the ones that are I don't know if we can call 20-year-olds kids, but nevertheless, those are the ones that we're seeing on camera. But those colleges are being run by 50-year-olds. They're being taught by 60-year-olds, and we're sitting here and we're getting the brunt of everything because nobody will help us. We need to help the next generation. This Bible means absolutely nothing to me if he didn't pass on that wisdom. And if that didn't go on through my grandparents, through my parents to me, this Bible would have meant nothing to me. But he did. And it's not just older people or people who are more wise that are at fault here. Every single one of us is at fault. We all could be teaching somebody. And I think a lot of us are just sitting around saying we care but not doing anything. And I'm speaking to myself as much as anybody else here. But it's not just that people need to pass on wisdom, it's that we need to seek it as well. Matthew 15:14 says, if the blind lead the blind, both will fall into a pit. And I think that's where we are today. That the blind are leading the blind because many of us Christians are just sitting on the sidelines. And I think every single one of us, because I know I can think of times where I just didn't care, where somebody needed help and I had better things to do. I think we can all think of a situation probably in our lives where that happened. Ray Ortlund, in his commentary on Proverbs, says, if we have love but not wisdom, we will harm people with the best of intentions. If we have courage but not wisdom, we will blunder boldly. If we have truth but not wisdom, we will make the gospel ugly to other people. If we have technology but not wisdom, we will use the best communications ever invented to broadcast stupidity. If we have revival but not wisdom, we'll use the power of God to throw the church into reverse gear. And so I think this is something we need to know when we can be the teacher and when we must be the student. Because we all at times need to be a teacher. I don't care if you're 15, I don't care if you're 85. We all have times when we need to be the student and we need to seek that out from other people. And there's times when we need to be the teachers. Those of us who are in Christ have something that the rest of the world doesn't. So even if you're 12 years old, that you still have a wisdom that you can offer to other people. When I hear people talking about Gen Z, you know who the worst people to ever seek out wisdom regarding Gen Z are? 75-year-olds who have no contact with Gen Z. You know who has the best wisdom about Gen Z? Gen Z. You know who also tends to have about the least amount of wisdom about everything else? Gen Z. But if we're talking about Gen Z, who should we probably be going to learn about Gen Z? Gen Z. We can't just seek out wisdom from people who are older than us or who are wiser than us, because those aren't always the people we need to be seeking the wisdom from. Because sometimes those who are not overall wiser than us can give us that wisdom in an area. If I'm trying to learn about how to be the best electrician, how to gain that wisdom, that skill in life, it doesn't overall necessarily matter to me if that person's a Christian or not. I want to learn how to be an electrician from the best person on the planet. And so we need to not just look to people who are in their 70s, though that's obviously a good, people that are older often have better and more depth of wisdom, but that doesn't mean that they're the only ones we ought to be seeking it from. And furthermore, if we have all this passion, as Ray Ortlund says, if we don't have the wisdom to go along with it, all these passions are aimless. No matter how good they are, and we want passion, we need passion, but if we don't have wisdom to be able to harness that, it will be aimless, and it will probably be destructive in the end. So here's the main takeaway I have for us today. God has given us the gospel truth of Proverbs to share it with others. It's something that we've received from God, and it's something that we actively ought to share with other people. Again, Ray Ortlund says, the book of Proverbs is a gospel book because it's part of the Bible. That means this book of Proverbs is good news for bad people. It's about grace for sinners. It's about hope for failures. It's about wisdom for idiots. This book is Jesus himself coming to us as our counselor, as our sage, as our life coach. The Lord Jesus Christ is a competent thinker for all times and cultures. He is a genius, and he freely offers us, even us, his unique wisdom. We don't deserve it. We don't deserve his wisdom. We don't deserve his love. We don't deserve anything. But it always comes back to the cross. It comes back to that grace, that mercy that he offers us each and every day. He puts people into our lives that we can teach. He puts people into our lives that can teach us. And yeah, I've had those stories in my past of pastors themselves who have been very discouraging about going into ministry. And I'm not still angry at those people, but those situations still frustrate me. And I think they should, because now that I'm in the pastoral position, I don't want that to be somebody else's story because of me. God, in his grace, has put people into our lives to both teach us and to help us teach. And I thank the Lord that story continued on, and now I'm here, and I don't have those complaints. People here there have been many people that have poured into me that have helped me gain a lot of wisdom and discernment in the last number of months, and I'm so thankful for that. Andy made a point a couple weeks ago towards the end of his sermon. I thought it was a really great point. He said, everybody can teach somebody how to take a step with Jesus. I think it's a great point, but I think also the way we hear that can sometimes be like it's this whole discipleship matrix that's going to take us 2 to 3 years, and we got to go through this program, we got to check all these boxes so that somebody can take that giant leap in theology or start living for Jesus in a better way and everything. And that is great. I don't think that I'm talking that down, but that's not everybody's call. I think maybe a better way to just say it is that everybody can teach somebody something. What it means to take a step with Jesus is sometimes a lot less than what we think it is. I was talking to someone this week, and she pointed out, she said, if we're truly living a gospel-centered life, then every aspect of our lives the gospel is going to pour into and pour out of. So if I can teach somebody how to deal with finances, it's going to be in a gospel-centered way. If you can teach someone how to play piano, if you're living a gospel-centered life, you're naturally going to teach people how to play piano in a way that honors and glorifies God. And so I think that, sometimes we think that to help someone take that next step with Jesus, we need to have a super firm grasp on the gospel so that we can teach them some deep theology about something they don't know, when really it's just taking that next step towards him. And if we help people, it doesn't, sometimes you get with somebody who you can help them take a giant leap towards Christ. And sometimes it's so much of a fraction of an inch that you don't even notice that they've taken a step. But if they take enough steps, eventually they come face to face with him and they have to do something about it. And at that point, it's between them and him. You're just the vehicle to help them get them there. You can't change people's hearts. You can't change people's lives. Only God can do that. Everybody can teach somebody something. So as a moment of response here, we're going to take a couple minutes in a time of prayer. And I want everyone to we got these connect cards sitting in the seat backs in front of you. There's notepads. And I want you to write down the answer that God gives you. Because if you're anything like me, if you don't write it down, you'll get to this afternoon, you'll remember it, and then think, I don't know. Was that really him? I don't know. This seems hard. This seems difficult. This doesn't seem like what he needs me to do. If we're going to know God, hear him speak, and do what he says, we need to commit to that. So we're going to take a couple minutes here, and I want us each to ask God, who can I ask to teach me, and who can I teach? And again, I don't care if we're 15 or if we're 85 years old, there's an answer to both of those. Or maybe you're at a point in your life where you're not really in a position to teach somebody. Maybe you've been backsliding in your faith. Maybe you've just plateaued. Maybe, I don't know, something's going on that you're not in a position to teach. Well, then there's somebody to teach you. And there's faces in the audience here that I don't know you personally. I don't know. Maybe this is your first week here. And if that's the case, and you ask these questions, but there's nobody that you know, but you know you need to be taught, come and talk to me. We've got plenty of people here that have a lot of wisdom that can help you. But God has also been gracious to put people into our lives that we can help because he's given us experience, he's given us understanding that other people don't have. And so we're going to take a couple minutes and again, ask God these questions honestly and hear what he speaks and do what he says.